Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Around the Big Ten podcast. I'm Mark Givler, joined as always by Chip Minnick. It was a very interesting weekend in the Big Ten on a lot of different fronts. We had a incredibly shocking loss. We had an incredibly impressive meltdown, and we have some questions about two of the better jobs in the league and whether or not they need to come open sooner than later. We have all sorts of things to talk about today. But let's start with the UCLA upset of Penn State. Chip, we talked about this last week, how we would know a lot about where Penn State was at mentally by how they approached this game. They were a 4-score favorite. They should have won this game by 30 points if they were locked in and regrouping as they kind of claimed they were throughout the week. That didn't happen. UCLA pounced all over them. Penn State was able to come back and then not finish the job anyway. UCLA putting up 41 points in the win over the Nittany Lions in what has to be the most shocking result in college football so far this season.
Without a doubt. UCLA never trailed. I mean, give credit where credit is due. UCLA took the early lead, had a successful onside kick that they were able to recover. I mean, they wanted it more. They wanted the heart, the passion, the intensity, everything that you would expect Penn State to kind of show the rest of the college football world, hey, we are bound and determined to rebound and regroup from this disappointing loss at Oregon. It wasn't until late in the game that Penn State all of a sudden realized, like, okay, these guys are not going to just go gently into the night, so to speak. I mean, it is a credit to UCLA, their interim coaches, their players. I mean, I freely admit it was a great game to watch. I realize if you're a Penn State fan, how angry and frustrating it must have been to have been watching that game. But as a college football fan, it was so impressive. I realized that Rick Neuheisel has a job as a CBS analyst, but as somebody who has children, I like the way he said, it's like, it's no different than watching, your kids perform in the school choir or, watching them excel. Like, that's how, I mean, he loves UCLA. He played there, he coached there. Obviously his son did the same thing and is in kind of the first time role as the offensive coordinator. So that's where I think like the pride was coming through. So I really enjoyed the game. I mean, just for the game itself. I mean, it went down to the wire, and if you're Penn State, I don't know what direction you want to take for the remainder of the season.
There is so much to unpack from that game. That was as bad, given the circumstances, that was as bad of a defensive performance as I've ever seen.
Oh.
A supposed top 10 team have. 41 points. UCLA essentially hit their season averages in the first half in points and yards and everything else. They doubled their rushing output per game. Went a couple touchdowns over their average points per game. They I think nearly doubled their total yards per. Like, this was a dreadful defensive performance. And the offense obviously wasn't great in the first half, but they were on the field. UCLA was just churning yards up and down the field on Penn State. And the offense was able, we've had a lot of questions. Drew Aller has taken a ton of heat over the years. He was the only thing keeping them in that game on Saturday. He had a great second half. He brings them all the way back. And then you have some chances there inside the red zone at the end. And like, Drew Aller is red hot at this point. Like, he is as red hot as he's ever been in a game. And you took the ball out of his hands. You ran it on 2nd and 10 with the clock winding down. Then you go and you have that awful 4th down call. Like, what are they doing? That was just a dismal defensive effort, and followed by just horrendous play calling there at the end by Penn State with a red-hot quarterback taking the ball out of his hands. What on earth was that?
Like you said, a lot to unpack. I mean, it's adding insult to injury, the fact that Jim Knowles, who was hired away from from Ohio State, to be Penn State's defensive coordinator, making $3 million a year, was completely befuddled and upstaged by a first-time offensive coordinator in Jerry Neuheisel, who freely admitted that he was struggling with the headset. I'm not making fun of Jerry Neuheisel. I've never been in that situation, but I appreciated the candid honesty of Jerry Neuheisel saying, okay, not knowing exactly what I needed to do in terms of like with the play calling. So the fact that you have an inexperienced play caller completely outfoxing a veteran, highly paid defensive coordinator throughout the entire game. And to your point, Mark, from a moment ago, the offensive coordinator, my wife and I, we were watching it, and again, we were just enjoying the game. But I kept saying to my wife, I can't believe the very cavalier attitude of the way that they were calling plays. Like you referenced 2nd and 10. It's like, it's not as though you have scored a touchdown. You need a touchdown. You need to score a touchdown, and to just kind of let the clock tick away and think. And that 4th down call was just absolutely terrible. So no one is going to be absolved of any kind of criticism. And then, for James Franklin afterwards to kind of basically lay the blame on a myriad of factors without really kind of pointing the finger directly at himself, trying to, like the travel, and we didn't really regroup from last week. Hello. That's exactly that's exactly what your job is to get everyone to understand, hey, we're all disappointed. We're going to go out, we're going to fly out to UCLA, and we're going to show everybody that we are still one of the best teams in college football. So it was just befuddling.
I mean, there's no excuse in the 12-team playoff era. There's really not much excuse to let these types of games beat you twice in terms of that Oregon loss, because Penn State still had everything in front of it. I mean, they were still in great shape to make the college football playoff. They still had an outside chance. They had a path. They play Indiana. They play Ohio State. They had a path to get a rematch with Oregon in the Big Ten championship game. They had everything in front of them. And they made a big stink all week about how Jim Knowles talked to the team about how Ohio State lost last year at the end and came back and regrouped. Clearly that didn't hit home with anybody. This is by far the worst loss of the James Franklin era at Penn State. For all the heat he's taken for certain games and losing, these are the games that he's won. He's lost the big ones, and that made a big deal about that. But this was awful. I mean, UCLA was arguably the worst team in Power 4 heading into this weekend. Certainly on the short list.
Well, they were
dreadful this year. Yeah,
they were staring down an 0-12 season. Most people after the firing of Deshaun Foster, and when you started looking at UCLA's remaining schedule and just knowing, okay, Tim Skipper, he's going to do the best he can. We talked about this, the idea that these coaches and I'm not taking shots at the coaching staff that is in an interim type of a situation, but they know that they're on borrowed time. So in their mind, it's like, okay, we need to do the best we can for the kids that are sticking around, but we want to do what we can to kind of make ourselves look good and enhance our resumes. So when job opportunities present themselves after the season, that we'll have somewhere to go. So when it comes to UCLA, the expectation was, okay, Penn State's coming in, we'll take our beating, and the fact that the fans haven't been coming to games, and that's kind of a whole logistic issue that UCLA needs to figure out what they want to do, how to address that. The fact that those fans were treated to, those kids played with their heart and with an intensity that had been lacking. And I just can't say enough about the job that UCLA and the poor job that Penn State coaches. I mean, for James Franklin to blame travel, and I'm thinking that is exactly that is something that every Big Ten coach since Penn State joined the Big Ten 30 plus years ago has said, it's one of the frustrating things about going in and out of Happy Valley is that it's not an easy place to get to. So for James Franklin to try and turn it around and travel is an issue, that's been out there for forever. So it's just perplexing. And what I found very interesting was later on in the evening watching the Ohio State Minnesota game at halftime. And I've said this before, I'll just reiterate it. I'm never ever pushing for someone to lose their job, but Nicole Auerbach, who's on NBC, said maybe it's time for James Franklin to look elsewhere in this offseason at jobs that are open. The speculation, we talked about this in the offseason, okay, a $56 million buyout. Personally, I'd be very surprised if Penn State, considering all the massive renovations that they're doing to Beaver Stadium, there's a hefty price tag to that, let alone, let's throw another $56 million on there. I find it very difficult to believe that Penn State would want to ante up that kind of money. But maybe if another position at another college opened itself up that James Franklin could leave for without any kind of financial penalty, maybe that's the best thing for everyone involved.
It might be. I'm just, I'm not particularly convinced that James Franklin's going to do that. I mean, think about this from a financial perspective for him. He's going to leave all that money on the table and then maybe try and recruit. Like, who's going to hire him that's going to be able to pay him that much money and
good
recoup
point.
all that?
That's a good
Plus,
point.
He's kind of throwing in the towel. He's giving up in a sense. There's an ego pride thing at play here as well. I don't know. I mean, I agree with the premise that it might be better for everyone, but it's not going to be better for James Franklin's pride or his wallet. And that those two things make a lot of pride and wallets make a lot of decisions, especially in college football. So we'll see if that's something. But yeah, this Garrett Seawright had a good podcast yesterday here on the channel, talking about this being the beginning of the end of the James Franklin era, and he doesn't think Penn State and James Franklin can mutually recover from this together. I don't disagree with that, and we'll just see moving forward kind of what happens, especially this. They're not going to do anything like this, this week. It would be in the off season, but they've got to win out now. And here's where I get on. People are like, why would you schedule tough in the non-conference anymore? This is why.
Exactly.
Because in a year where we're almost certainly going to see a 9-3 team get in the playoff. I just think we are. I really think we're going to see a 9-3 team get in this year because everyone is beating up on each other. The SEC is beating up on each other. The Big 12 is beating up on each other. The ACC is a mess. This is not a year where it's just going to neatly come out where all these 1 and 2 loss teams are going to be out there. There's going to be 9-3 wild cards, in my opinion, at least one. And Penn State, unless they win out, maybe if they can split that Ohio State Indiana thing and get to 9-3, they're going to be at the back of the line of the 9-3s because of how bad their non-conference schedule was. If they had played some teams with a pulse, you didn't have to go out and schedule Alabama, but if you went out and scheduled, a mid-tier team like a Syracuse or something like that, if you had done that instead of playing just awful teams, 3 of them, you would still be able to kind of finagle this in a way where, we can still, but now it's you have to win out or you're done.
I mentioned this. It's not that I was hoping for this, but I had said prior to the Oregon game, the concern I would have if I was a Penn State fan was the fact that you really didn't know what kind of a team you had. The fact that they scheduled such, I'm just going to say, weak non-conference opponents, and that they played them and didn't look impressive, by the way. They won those games, but they did not look, not that I was expecting them to run up the score, but they just didn't look impressive in their 3 non-conference. And then they had the bye week. And then I said, Oregon's going to come in. They're not going to be intimidated. Oregon at one point was up on them 17-3. I gave credit to Penn State for rallying and forcing that game to go into double overtime. But the reality is that Penn State, that non-conference schedule, like you just said, Mark, did them no favors. And when you take a glance at their upcoming schedule, because as we're recording this, we already know that on October 18th, that game that they have an upcoming game this coming weekend against Northwestern at home. And I genuinely feel sorry for Northwestern going into Beaver Stadium. That's gonna be a brutal environment. But what I was going to say about October 18th, we already know that that's a night game in Kinnick, which strange things happen. And now so you're just adding, compounding the challenge that you have. You referenced the game at Ohio State. They host Indiana, but that is certainly not going to be an easy game on November 8th. And then they travel to Michigan State November 15th. So my long-winded rant is that it's a very treacherous path for Penn State, the remainder of the schedule. And right now, I think, you referenced, Garrett's podcast, which I listened to. I just believe Penn State right now, you have to play for pride, hope for the best, because, everything is completely beyond your control. And if you're Penn State, you're probably trying to just enhance your bowl game experience versus a college football playoff berth.
A bowl game that none of these kids are going to play in.
You got it. You got it.
They're not going to have any of these guys these star players that came back are not going to play in that bowl game. So they got to win out, or they're done. My final thing I'll say is going back to how bad the defensive effort was, and again, it was arguably the worst defensive performance I've ever seen, given the circumstances of a supposed top 10 team. It was so bad on the broadcast. You had Gary Danielson comparing Nico Iamaleava to Vince Young. That's how bad they made Nico Iamaleava, who's been extraordinarily average this year, look like Vince Young. That's the best way I can put how bad their defensive performance was. They made Nico Iamaleava look like Vince Young.
I was happy for Nico, though, in the sense, kind of what I referenced.
He was great.
The fact that he was unleashed. We'll talk about it later this week. I'm kind of skeptical about how well UCLA will do when they travel to Michigan State. But my larger point, I agree with you. I think Nico, he certainly had not warranted any of that hype, and the fact that Penn State, they paid all this money to Jim Knowles to have him run all over and throw all over them. Just looks, like you said, exceptionally bad.
They never accounted for him in the run game. They pretty much no spy, nothing. They just let him. It was unbelievable. All right. Well, we'll see what happens there. But Penn State is staring down the barrel of an all-time disappointing season, I think. All-time disappointing season. So they're not ranked right now. They dropped them. They dropped them out. And they're going to have to. They got some games coming up that could keep them out. So we'll see what happens. The other game I kind of wanted to dive into was Wisconsin at Michigan. Michigan wins by 2 touchdowns. As expected at home, we both felt Michigan was going to win. I am beyond disappointed in Luke Fickell. I was getting ready with about 5. I watched a lot of that game with about, 6 or 7 minutes left in that game. They're down 2 touchdowns, but they're playing hard. I was getting ready for this show, and I'm thinking about how I'm going to come on here. I'm going to talk about, as bad as things are for Wisconsin right now, as bad as the record's going to be this year and everything else, it looks like the kids are still playing hard for their coaches. And how I was going to kind of, morph this kind of into a positive, like, hey, I could have seen them getting blown out by 5 touchdowns by Michigan, but here they are battling hard into the fourth quarter, covering the spread, everything else. And Luke Fickell, with 4 minutes left in the game, down 2 touchdowns, allows Michigan to run the entire clock out without using his 3 timeouts. I'm appalled at that. I am genuinely what? Chip, help me here. I am beyond appalled at this.
You're not the only one. Joel Klatt of Fox was openly on the telecast asking the exact same question, because as you said, I was watching that game, and I want to give credit to Wisconsin, like you just said, Mark. Like it was 10-7 at the half. Wisconsin was battling. Wasn't until late in the third quarter that Michigan finally started to assert themselves, and they took the lead and never looked back. And it was one of these things where, okay, Hunter Simmons, all right, not that he had a great game, but the quarterback play was better, and they were scrappy, and it's all this. And then to just kind of give up. I mean, that's, for lack of a better word, that's the only way I can describe it, with, like you said, with 4 minutes left and not use any of the timeouts. I realized that you were down, and it might have been, a wasted effort in terms of, okay, you calling the timeouts, but still, like, to show to your team, hey, let's keep scrapping. Let's keep battling until, it's completely done. And that would be the thing that I would think, if you were a Wisconsin beat writer covering the Badgers, that you would be asking Luke Fickell, what was the rationale or the lack thereof in letting your timeouts not be used in the latter moments of that game?
I don't think I've seen anything like that. It's not like they were down 20. Like, if you're down like 20 some point, like if you're down 3 scores with 4 minutes left, 4.5 minutes left, okay. Like 3 or 4 scores, understandable. Get out. But like, how many times have we seen teams down 2 scores with like a little under 5 minutes left, use their timeouts, get a stop, go down and score, and get in position for an onside kick, get the ball back to tie the game? What are you doing? I saw a team. It was infuriating. I saw a team that was still playing hard for its coaches, and then a coaching staff that quit on its players.
That's a good way to put it. That's probably the best way to put it. Like I said,
he totally quit on his players. Yeah,
that Luke, afterwards was all fired up, saying about how we're going to need to find out who has the competitive spirit. And, I'm thinking, okay, Luke, look in the mirror, man.
Yeah. That I was absolutely appalled watching that. I was like, I cannot believe this. They're quitting on their players. That is unbelievable. I don't think you can defend the Luke Fickell era at Wisconsin anymore.
That's fair.
And when Ohio State goes in there, in a couple weeks and beats them by 100 in their own building, I think it's going to be time to cut the cord, rip the Band-Aid off. I don't know if they will, but we're talking about Garrett thinks it's the beginning of the end for James Franklin, Penn State. I think that's the beginning of the end for Luke Fickell in Wisconsin. I don't know how Luke Fickell in Wisconsin recover from that, because now your coach just quit on his players with plenty of time left.
Yeah, I mean, is
he asking to be fired? Does he want his buyout? Like, does he want out and will force the issue to get his buyout? Like, I have no explanation for what I watched there. That was absolutely nuts.
And the thing is, they have. I'm not saying that they are going to, but this coming weekend, they're bringing in a traditional rival in Iowa. So you would think, all right, we want to play for pride. We want to show everyone that we still have a pulse, and we still have pride in ourselves and in our program. After the latter minutes of that game, open and fair question to ask that.
Well, that will bring us to our last discussion point here in today's episode. Maryland, again, the same thing with the Wisconsin-Michigan game. With going into the fourth quarter of the Maryland game, so Maryland's up 20-0 in this game against Washington in the second half. And I'm getting ready for the show, and I'm saying, okay, I'm going to have to apologize to Maryland. I'm going to have to apologize to Mike Loxley. I'm going to have to eat crow about my stance that Washington's an 8 or 9 win team. This is going to be a really bad show for me. it's going to be a total just apology tour to Mike Locksley in Maryland. And Washington snaps out of it, reels off 24 straight, and beats Maryland 24-20 in the most Vegas nose game of all time with that 5.5-point spread that was super, super low. And then Washington wins but doesn't cover somehow. So I said a chip before we start recording. This is why we can't get behind Maryland. This is why we can't buy into Mike Locksley.
I freely confess. I was, because again, all these games were on kind of, I don't want to say at the exact same time, but kind of overlapping. So it's like between UCLA, Penn State, Nebraska, Michigan State, which was competitive. And, that kind of went the way that game kind of, I should say, the way that I expected for Nebraska to win. I expected Michigan State to play them competitively to a point, and then Nebraska won. But getting back to the point about Washington at Maryland, I freely admit I saw DeMond Williams Jr. throw an ugly interception. As you referenced, Mark, it was 20-0. I thought, okay, Maryland has this one done. I kept watching the other games. Freely admit, I just figured it was in the bag. It was done. And then when I happened to see the final score, I was just, okay, like it was kind of, all right, have to watch on Big Ten Network, the final drive, how this all came about, because it certainly looked very bleak for Washington. So want to give credit to the Huskies for not folding and for playing tough. Maryland, we've seen this story before, and no disrespect to Washington, I don't consider Washington one of the quote unquote like physical teams in the Big Ten that Maryland has traditionally struggled with. It's usually been when they've had to go up against an Ohio State or a Michigan that likes to run the ball and they can't stop it. Maryland, what I was able to glean from their loss to Washington was the fact they can't run the ball. And this is something that I saw in the spring, and that was a concern. And Maryland obviously hasn't figured it out. And as they get deeper into Big Ten play, other teams are going to capitalize upon this. Malik Washington's tremendous. Nobody's disputing his talent. But if you make Maryland a one-dimensional team, it's going to be very difficult for them to have sustained success. So I think Maryland, they've got to regroup quickly, because they've got a very hungry Nebraska team coming in to play them that's eager to show that, okay, we're not as bad as we looked against Michigan. The fact that they had they had to come, I don't want to say come back, but like they were behind Michigan State and rallied to win decisively at home. So they're going on the road and they want to show, hey, we can go on the road and beat another solid team in the Big Ten. So, but Maryland, yeah, you got to figure some stuff out, because you want to get to bowl game eligibility, and right now it's just not looking like it's going to come to pass.
Yeah, this is a huge kind of inflection point for Maryland to see how they respond to this. Because if this thing just goes sideways, I'm right back on they got to make a change train. It's the opposite of Godfather 3, where just when I thought I was in, you pushed me back out. Like, yes. Just when I thought I was in, you finally brought me in. I'm like, okay, this is working. You pushed me back out. This is going to be enormous to see how they respond the next couple of weeks. And Malik Washington's a special talent. You can't waste him. You can't waste him. And you don't want to push him to the portal, because if there's one thing we know about the offseason, it's that we're going to hear reports of Malik Washington being offered absurd amounts of money to go to school X, who, powerhouse program X, who lost its quarterback to the NFL. So like when if Ty Simpson goes pro at Alabama, or, whatever it might be, or, Tennessee might need a quarterback, whoever it is, we're going to hear things about, so-and-so's offering Malik Washington $5 million a year to transfer from Maryland. Well, you better figure this out around him. But this is a pattern, and this looks like a lot of other Maryland seasons, and we'll see if they can change the narrative a little bit here the next few weeks. Chip, any other parting thoughts from the weekend or just general sentiments? It was kind of a weird Saturday, some weird upsets, some other teams who weren't upset but found it hard for a while. Wrap up the weekend for us.
I would say, yeah. I mean, we had said going into this past weekend's slate of games for the Big Ten that, okay, they're not necessarily high profile, but they're going to be interesting in helping to define kind of that middle tier. And I'm not saying that we have definitive answers, because we don't. I mean, we're still midway through the season, but we're getting a better understanding. For example, like Nebraska, Washington, Michigan State is still they're fighting. I want to give a quick shout out to Purdue, because they lost, but they are doing exactly what I said their goal should be, which was to be kind of that irritating pain in the rump. They were for most of that game, against Illinois. You talked about Wisconsin kind of giving up. Purdue never did that at all. So I think, we're kind of starting to get a better understanding of that middle tier of who are the next rung of teams. But it was just a great weekend for college football.
We'll be back here in a couple of days for just an unbelievable slate of Big Ten games on Saturday. Big Ten, a lot of the college football universe is going to revolve around the Big Ten this weekend. We're going to preview everything and talk we'll talk all the matchups. We'll dive into a few of the bigger matchups in depth, and look forward to doing that. But thanks everyone again for watching and listening. We'll be back here in a couple of days.